Hey there. Before we start with the story, I would really appreciate if you could subscribe and let me know what you think of the story in the comments, and also let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Daniel was a 23-year-old computer science student with an insatiable curiosity. For years, he had heard whispers about the deep web, a shadowy corner of the internet hidden from everyday browsers, where secrets lay buried beneath layers of encryption. At first, it was just a topic of fascination, something to research during late-night study breaks. Stories of black markets, mysterious forums, and illegal activities floated through his social media feeds like urban legends. But one night, as rain pattered against his dorm room window, Daniel decided he needed to see it for himself. Armed with Tor and a VPN, he plunged into the unknown. The initial exploration was uneventful. He stumbled upon outdated websites with crude HTML designs and forums where anonymous users discussed everything from conspiracy theories to encrypted messaging protocols. It was strange, but not particularly menacing. He laughed at his earlier apprehension. This is just a poorly lit version of the regular internet, he thought. Yet the deeper he delved, the more peculiar the content became. Links with cryptic titles like The White Room, Angels in the Code, and Forgotten Places started appearing. His heart raced as he hovered over them. One link, in particular, stood out: the silent market. Its description read, "Where secrets come to light." The page required a login, and a chat box popped up. "Do you wish to know what others won't dare to seek?" Daniel hesitated before typing yes. Almost instantly, a reply appeared. "Prove it. Solve this." The screen flashed, revealing an elaborate puzzle of distorted images and fragments of text in an unrecognizable script. It was challenging, but manageable for someone of Daniel's technical skill. He worked for hours, driven by a mix of intrigue and pride, until he finally cracked it. The screen went black, then reloaded with a single line of text. "Welcome, Seeker." The new page was minimalist, just a plain black background and a list of links. But something about it unsettled Daniel. The links weren't labeled like before. They were strings of numbers and symbols, almost like coordinates. Against his better judgment, he clicked one at random. What loaded next made his stomach drop: a grainy live feed of what appeared to be a warehouse. The camera was shaky, the lighting dim. He could hear faint sounds, muffled voices, the scrape of metal. He tried to close the window, but another pop-up appeared. "Are you scared?" His hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. Another message appeared. "Stay. Watch." Despite the unease gnawing at him, Daniel stayed. The live feed shifted angles, focusing on a lone chair in the center of the warehouse. It was empty, but a sense of foreboding hung in the air. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the screen went dark, and a new message appeared. "You've been chosen." A chill ran down his spine. He hadn't entered any personal information, hadn't even created an account. But somehow, they knew he was there. Shaken, Daniel closed the browser and shut down his computer. He tried to brush it off as a prank, some elaborate scare tactic to keep curious minds at bay. But that night, He dreamt of the warehouse, of the empty chair, and the unseen presence watching from the shadows. When he woke, his laptop was already on, the screen displaying a single word in bold: return. Despite every instinct telling him to stop, Daniel found himself drawn back to the deep web the following night. The word return lingered on his mind all day, echoing like a dare he couldn't ignore. His rational side told him it was a scare tactic, someone toying with random visitors. But deep down, he felt it was personal. Curiosity, mixed with a strange compulsion, guided his hands as he reopened Tor and navigated to the bookmarked link. The silent market greeted him again, but this time it looked different. The interface had shifted, displaying only one clickable link: for the chosen. He hesitated for what felt like an eternity. The cursor hovered over the link, his finger trembling on the mouse. Finally, he clicked. The page that loaded was eerily simple. A white screen with a chat box. The text in the box read, "Would you like to see what lies beyond?" Against his better judgment, he typed, "Yes." Immediately, a cascade of distorted images and jumbled code flashed across the screen. Then, a new puzzle appeared, far more complex than the first. This time, it required him to decipher fragments of ancient-looking text and correlate them with patterns hidden in an audio file. Hours passed as Daniel lost himself in the task, frustration giving way to obsession. When he finally solved the puzzle, the screen flickered to reveal a live stream. This one was unlike the warehouse feed from before. It showed a dimly lit room, filled with monitors, their screens glowing faintly in the darkness. A figure sat at a desk, their face obscured by a mask resembling a featureless porcelain doll. The figure didn't move for several minutes, as if waiting for Daniel to observe. Then, as though aware of his presence, the masked figure slowly tilted its head toward the camera. A synthesized voice crackled through his speakers. "Welcome back, Daniel." Daniel's blood ran cold. He hadn't entered his name anywhere, not in the browser, not on the website. His mind raced through possibilities. Had his device been hacked? Was his webcam active? Before he could process the thought, the masked figure spoke again. "You seek the truth, don't you? All knowledge has a cost." The screen switched to a series of rotating images, grotesque medical experiments, cryptic symbols carved into stone, and what appeared to be blueprints for futuristic technology. Each image lingered for only a second before flashing to the next. "What are you willing to pay?" the voice asked. Panicking, Daniel tried to exit the browser, but his keyboard and mouse were unresponsive. The voice continued, "Curiosity binds you. Fear traps you. Choose." A new prompt appeared. "Proceed or leave." He clicked leave, but nothing happened. Instead, the stream shifted back to the masked figure. "There is no leaving once the door is open," the voice declared. The camera zoomed in on the figure's hand, revealing it holding a USB drive with a number etched into its side. Moments later, a notification popped up on Daniel's screen. "Download complete." The files downloaded to his laptop were labeled with cryptic names like H01ZRAN, S1L3NET, and R3Birth. Against his better judgment, Daniel opened the first file. It was a video of a man sitting in the same chair from the warehouse live feed. He was blindfolded, his hands bound behind his back. A distorted voice, off camera, commanded the man to speak. "Tell them what you saw," the voice ordered. The man hesitated before whispering, "It's real. They're watching. You can't escape them." A loud crash cut the video short, leaving Daniel staring at a frozen image of the man's terrified face. The second file contained a text document with instructions to access a hidden page on the deep web. The third file, a corrupted image, took several attempts to open. When it finally loaded, it revealed a photograph of Daniel's dorm room window. He froze, his heart pounding. The image was taken from outside, in the rain, on the very night he had first accessed the site. His breath hitched as he noticed a timestamp in the corner. It was from only minutes before he had opened the file. Someone was outside, gripped by terror. Daniel rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain. The street below was empty, but the feeling of being watched was palpable. Returning to his laptop, he deleted the files and shut it down, convinced he was done with the deep web forever. Yet, as he tried to sleep, his phone vibrated on his nightstand. The notification was from an unknown number. "You can't delete the truth. See you soon." Daniel's life began unraveling the moment he received that chilling message. "You can't delete the truth. See you soon." His initial reaction was to dismiss it as another cruel prank, orchestrated by whoever ran the silent market. But paranoia quickly set in. Every shadow seemed darker, every passerby suspicious. Over the next few days, strange occurrences escalated. It started small, his laptop powering on by itself in the middle of the night, or his phone flashing odd messages for a split second before returning to normal. Then, more invasive events began. One morning, Daniel woke to find a small package on his doorstep. It was unmarked, wrapped in plain brown paper. Against his better judgment, he opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in smudged ink. "Plug it in. Don't ignore us." His stomach churned as he stared at the ominous item. After hours of debating, he decided to destroy the drive, smashing it with a hammer in his dorm bathroom. But the fear didn't leave him. Instead, it grew. That same evening, another message arrived on his phone. "You should have listened." His roommates began noticing his erratic behavior. Daniel barely left his room, kept the curtains drawn, and flinched at the slightest noise. They tried to intervene, but he brushed them off with excuses about coursework and stress. Deep down, he knew there was no explaining the truth. They wouldn't believe him anyway. As days passed, his isolation deepened. Sleep became impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he envisioned the masked figure from the live feed or the man in the warehouse chair. He felt their presence, lurking just outside his awareness. Then, the knocks started. They came late at night, slow, deliberate raps on the door. At first, Daniel convinced himself it was a mistake. Maybe someone had the wrong room. But when he finally gathered the courage to look through the peephole, there was no one there. It happened again the following night, and the night after that. On the third night, he shouted through the door, demanding to know who was there. The knocking stopped, replaced by a faint scratching sound. Chills ran down his spine as he backed away. The next morning, Daniel found another package outside his door. this one was heavier, wrapped more meticulously. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing an old VHS tape and a small, outdated, portable player. The tape had no label, but Daniel already knew it would contain something horrifying. Against his better judgment, he played it. The grainy footage showed a dimly lit corridor that seemed vaguely familiar. The camera moved slowly, as though carried by someone walking. Daniel's heart sank when he realized it was his dorm hallway. The video continued until it reached his door. The camera lingered there, focusing on the number. Then came the knocking, 3 loud, deliberate raps. Just as he had heard every night, the camera stayed fixed on the door. But suddenly, it cut to black. When the video resumed, it showed the inside of his room. Daniel's heart stopped. The footage wasn't from his perspective. It was from whoever had filmed it. The camera panned across the room, stopping on his sleeping figure curled up on the bed. The video ended abruptly, leaving him frozen in terror, unable to take it any longer. Daniel reached out to campus security. He explained that someone had been harassing him, leaving packages and filming him while he slept. The guards dismissed his concerns, claiming there was no evidence of forced entry into his dorm. They advised him to lock his door and relax. Frustrated and terrified, Daniel began to question his own sanity. Could this all be in his head? But the events felt too real, too orchestrated to be mere hallucinations. One evening, after convincing himself he needed fresh air, Daniel ventured out to the campus library. The brightly lit space offered a brief reprieve from his paranoia. As he browsed the shelves, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was another text from the unknown number. "Nice to see you outside." His breath caught in his throat as he scanned the room. No one seemed to be paying him any attention, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Rushing back to his dorm, Daniel locked every door and window, barricading himself inside. But as the night stretched on, the unease only grew. At precisely 3 a.m., his phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a live video feed. With shaking hands, he opened it. The footage showed the exterior of his dorm building, zooming in on his window. Suddenly, the camera moved upward, showing a figure standing on the roof, silhouetted against the moonlight. The video cut out, replaced by a final message: "We're closer than you think." Daniel barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. When morning came, he found a new package waiting for him, even though he'd locked everything. Inside was a photograph of him, sitting at his desk, taken from outside. Daniel was unraveling. Every attempt to ignore the mysterious messages, packages, and terrifying videos only seemed to escalate the torment. The photograph in the package, proof that someone was watching him from outside his window, was the final straw. He couldn't keep running. He couldn't pretend anymore. If he wanted to end this nightmare, he needed to confront whoever was behind it. With trembling hands, Daniel powered on his laptop and reconnected to the deep web. The silent market awaited him, its black background and cryptic text both familiar and foreboding. This time, the site had only one link: "Face the truth." He hesitated for a moment before clicking. The screen went black, then filled with a new live stream. It showed a darkened room, illuminated by the cold glow of computer monitors. In the center was the masked figure he had seen before. As Daniel stared at the screen, a chat box popped up. The message read, "You've come far, but are you ready to see?" A prompt appeared below it with two options, yes or no. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to choose no, to shut the laptop and walk away forever. But he knew there was no walking away. Not now. With a deep breath, he clicked yes. The screen changed again, showing a map with a blinking red dot. It was a location in the industrial part of the city, not far from campus. Below the map was another message. Come alone. Midnight. Don't be late. For hours, Daniel sat paralyzed, debating his next move. He could go to the police, but what could he tell them? That someone from the deep web was playing mind games with him. They would never believe him. As the clock approached midnight, he knew there was only one choice. He had to go. Daniel arrived at the location, a derelict warehouse on the outskirts of town. The area was eerily quiet. The only sound, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional rustle of wind. The building loomed ahead, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. A single light flickered above the entrance. Daniel's heart pounded as he approached the door, his footsteps echoing in the empty lot. When he pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges seemed deafening. Inside, the air was cold and damp. The smell of rust and mildew filled his nostrils. The space was vast, with towering shelves and abandoned machinery casting long shadows in the dim light. At the center of the room was a single chair, identical to the one from the live stream. Next to it was a table holding a laptop and a small box. As Daniel stepped closer, the laptop's screen lit up, displaying a message. Sit down. He hesitated, glancing around the room for any sign of movement. The silence was oppressive. Slowly, he lowered himself into the chair. The laptop emitted a faint beep, and the screen changed to show the masked figure. "You've done well to come this far," the synthesized voice said, "but knowledge has a price." Before Daniel could respond, the box on the table clicked open. Inside was a small syringe filled with a clear liquid, and a piece of paper with the words, "Prove your worth." His mind raced. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The masked figure tilted its head slightly. "You want answers, don't you? Show us your dedication." Daniel's hands trembled as he picked up the syringe. Was this some kind of test? A trap? He looked back at the screen, but the figure remained silent. Minutes felt like hours as he weighed his options. Finally, driven by a mix of fear and desperation, he injected the liquid into his arm. The effects were immediate. His vision blurred, and a wave of nausea swept over him. The room seemed to tilt and warp as he struggled to stay conscious. The masked figure's voice returned, distorted and echoing. "Now, you're ready to see." The laptop screen changed, displaying a series of images and videos. What he saw defied explanation. Scientific experiments on humans, bizarre rituals involving symbols he didn't recognize, and figures in masks gathered around an altar. Each image was more horrifying than the last, and yet he couldn't look away. As the effects of the drug intensified, Daniel felt his perception of reality slipping. The walls of the warehouse seemed to dissolve, replaced by an endless void filled with shifting shapes and colors. The masked figure's voice echoed around him, reciting cryptic phrases. The veil is thin, the truth is infinite. You are part of the machine. His mind felt like it was being torn apart, flooded with knowledge he couldn't comprehend. He saw flashes of people's faces, some familiar, some not, all staring at him with hollow eyes. When the hallucinations subsided, Daniel found himself back in the chair, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The masked figure was still on the screen, watching him silently. You've seen a fraction of the truth, it said. There's no turning back now. The screen went dark, leaving him alone in the cold, empty warehouse. As he stumbled outside, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, he realized his life would never be the same. Daniel's return to his dorm after the harrowing night at the warehouse was a blur. His body moved on autopilot, but his mind was trapped in a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The images and phrases from the warehouse haunted him, replaying like a broken record in his head. Every corner of his room seemed darker, every shadow more menacing. The laptop sat closed on his desk, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him, waiting for him to take the next step. He wanted to throw it out the window, to burn it, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. They were everywhere now, whoever they were. The next few days blurred together in a haze of paranoia and sleeplessness. He tried to return to normal life, attending classes, and pretending nothing was wrong. But the cracks in his facade were impossible to hide. He felt eyes on him constantly, as if someone were following him wherever he went. Whispers of his name seemed to echo in empty hallways, and his phone buzzed with cryptic messages that disappeared before he could read them fully. One night, his phone rang, an unlisted number. When he answered, there was no voice, only the faint sound of breathing. Then, a distorted voice whispered, "You belong to us now." Desperation set in. Daniel decided to go to the police, but his attempts to explain his situation only made him sound unhinged. "Someone's watching me," he told the officer at the desk. "They've been inside my room. They know everything about me." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any proof?" Daniel's hands trembled as he recounted the warehouse, the messages, the files. But without tangible evidence, his story sounded like the ramblings of a paranoid mind. "Try to get some rest," the officer said dismissively. "You're probably stressed out from school." Defeated, Daniel returned to his dorm, only to find his door slightly ajar. His blood ran cold as he pushed it open. The room had been ransacked. His books were strewn across the floor, his desk drawers emptied, and his laptop was gone. On his bed lay a single piece of paper with the words, "You can't run from us." He felt sick. This wasn't just a game or a psychological trick. It was real. They had been here, in his space, violating what little safety he had left. The next message came hours later, as he sat in his darkened room, staring at the chaos. His phone buzzed, and a notification appeared. "Check your email." He opened it to find a video attachment. Hesitating, he clicked play. The footage showed a man tied to a chair in a stark, empty room. The man's head was slumped forward, his body limp. As the camera zoomed in, Daniel gasped. It was one of his professors, someone he'd spoken to just days ago about his struggles with coursework. A distorted voice spoke over the video. Every choice has consequences. This is yours. Daniel felt like he was losing his grip on reality. The people behind this knew everything about him, his location, his connections, his fears, and now they were implicating him in something far darker than he could have imagined. The next message was even more horrifying. A live stream showing the outside of his dorm building. The camera zoomed in on his window, then panned to the front entrance. A figure stood there, dressed in black, wearing the now familiar, featureless mask. The figure raised a hand and waved at the camera before walking out of frame. That night, Daniel decided to leave. He packed a small bag and took a bus to a cheap motel on the edge of the city, hoping to disappear. But the escape was futile. The next morning, the motel receptionist handed him a package, saying, "This was left for you." His heart sank as he opened it to find a photo of himself sleeping in the motel bed, taken just hours earlier. On the back of the photo were 3 words: "No more running." Desperate for answers, Daniel returned to the deep web, his hands shaking as he navigated back to the silent market. The page greeted him with a new message: "You're ready for the next phase." He clicked the link without hesitation, feeling like he no longer had a choice. The site loaded a new set of instructions, directing him to a second location in the city, a rundown apartment building. This time, there was no hesitation. If they wanted him to come, he would come. He was done being afraid. The apartment building was a labyrinth of dark hallways and peeling wallpaper. The air smelled of mildew and decay. He followed the instructions to the 4th floor, where a door stood slightly ajar, a dim light spilling into the hallway. Inside was another laptop, already powered on and waiting for him. A video feed began as soon as he entered. It showed his parents' house, hundreds of miles away, with a masked figure standing in the front yard. "This is your final warning," the voice said. "Obey, or they suffer." Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he pleaded, "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" The voice ignored his questions. "Open the file on the desktop," it commanded. Daniel obeyed, his hands trembling. The file contained detailed blueprints for some kind of device, something complex and ominous. "Build this," the voice instructed. "You have 48 hours. If you fail, the consequences will be severe." Daniel stared at the screen, his mind racing. The schematics were beyond anything he'd ever seen before. It was technology that shouldn't exist, something that defied logic. But he knew he had no choice. They had backed him into a corner, and now he was playing their game. The 48-hour deadline loomed over Daniel like a guillotine. He locked himself in the dingy apartment, staring at the incomprehensible schematics on the laptop. The design was complex, a blend of advanced engineering and something disturbingly organic. The instructions seemed tailored for him, referencing techniques and tools he'd studied during his time in university. Despite his terror, Daniel realized that whoever was behind this had been watching him long before he stumbled onto the silent market. They knew his skills, his habits, and his weaknesses. With trembling hands, he began assembling the device. The parts had already been provided, scattered in labeled boxes around the apartment. Each piece fit together too perfectly, as though it had been designed specifically for him to construct. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. Cameras might have been hidden in the corners, silently observing his every move. The oppressive silence was only broken by the occasional text on the laptop screen. Good. Keep going. The words felt like chains, binding him deeper into their twisted game. The process consumed him. He lost track of time, barely eating or sleeping as he worked. His mind was a storm of fear and anger. Why him? Why had they chosen him? What was the purpose of this monstrosity he was building? On the second night, just hours before the deadline, the laptop emitted a soft chime. A video feed appeared, showing his parents in their living room, bound and gagged. A masked figure stood behind them, holding a knife. Finish the device, or they pay the price, the synthesized voice commanded. The screen went black again. Daniel broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. He didn't know if he could trust them to keep their word, but he couldn't take the chance. He worked with frantic desperation, assembling the final pieces of the device. When he was done, he stepped back and stared at it. The object was a twisted amalgamation of wires, glowing nodes and pulsing lights. It looked alive, as though it were breathing. A message appeared on the laptop. Turn it on. He hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to destroy it instead. But the image of his parents' terrified faces forced his hand. He flipped the switch. The device emitted a low hum, and the lights grew brighter, pulsating in a rhythmic pattern. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air in the room seemed to shift. A strange vibration coursed through Daniel's body, and the walls seemed to ripple like water. The laptop screen came to life again, displaying a series of cryptic symbols. The voice returned. You've done well. The gateway is open. A gateway. The realization hit him like a truck. This wasn't just a device. It was some kind of portal, and he had no idea what he had unleashed. The air grew colder, and a dark mist began to seep from the device, swirling and coalescing into shapes that defied explanation. Shadows moved within the mist, figures that seemed to exist just outside the boundaries of human perception. They whispered in a language Daniel couldn't understand, their voices both mesmerizing and terrifying. Suddenly, the door to the apartment burst open, and several men in black tactical gear stormed in. They wore no insignias, and their faces were obscured by masks. Get down, one of them shouted. Daniel dropped to the floor as the men surrounded the device. They began speaking into radios, their voices urgent. The gateway is unstable. We need to contain it now. One of them turned to Daniel. What did they tell you? What did they make you do? Before Daniel could answer, the device emitted a piercing screech. The mist thickened, and the figures within it grew more distinct. One of the men yelled, "It's breaking through!" Chaos erupted as the team scrambled to shut the device down. They attached wires and detonators to it, shouting commands Daniel couldn't understand. He watched in stunned silence as the figures in the mist began to emerge fully, their forms shifting and unnatural. Just as one of them reached out, a deafening explosion rocked the apartment. When Daniel woke up, he was lying in a hospital bed. His body ached, and his ears were ringing. A man in a dark suit sat beside him. "You're lucky to be alive," the man said, his voice cold. "You've been involved in something far beyond your understanding." Daniel tried to ask about his parents, but the man raised a hand to silence him. "They're safe, for now, but you've seen too much. You'll be monitored from here on out. If you so much as think about returning to the deep web, we'll know." The man left without another word, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. He wanted to believe it was over, but the memories of what he'd seen and done wouldn't let him rest. He dropped out of university and moved to a small town, trying to rebuild his life. But the shadows of the deep web followed him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was still being watched. Every so often, he'd receive a message, an unmarked envelope, a blank text, a faint whisper over the phone. The messages were always the same. "You opened the door. It can never be closed." Daniel became a recluse, haunted by the knowledge that he had unleashed something into the world. The gateway may have been destroyed, but the figures in the mist weren't gone. They were waiting, watching, and one day they would return. His curiosity had cost him everything: his sanity, his freedom, and perhaps even the safety of the world.